Welcome back, everybody. This is part 3 of class 1. This is the penetration testing class. And part 3, we will go over popular penetration testing techniques. Some common ones we will cover is your passive reach, open source monitoring, network mapping, and OS fingerprinting. We'll also go over spoofing, network sniffing, Trojan attacks, brute force attacks, and also vulnerability scanning. So all these words, I know you've heard them, but you're not got so familiar with them, like your Trojan attacks, brute force attacks. We have heard them as an IT professional, but in this class, I'll get you a little bit more familiar with it. Okay, then we'll also go over penetration testing process, all right? So let's begin. Let me walk you through some of the common penetration testing techniques first, right? So number one is passive research. So passive research is normally carried out during a start of an external penetration test, all right? And it provides information about the configurations of the organization and the organization systems by using your public domain sources such as domain name servers, your DNS, your Usenet. So these are some of the good examples. So a good example of Usenet is, or a usernet, is your news user groups, and ARIN, which is basically stands for your American Register and American Registry and Internet Numbers, ARIN, ARIN. Yeah. So next is your penetration testing technique is also an open source monitoring. So basically, when you say that open source monitoring, so this technique basically facilitates an organization to take necessary steps to ensure its confidentiality and integrity, right? So which is basically referred to as the open source monitoring. So moving on, next technique is our network mapping and OS fingerprinting. So this provides an overview. Basically, your network mapping and OS fingerprinting provides an overview of the configuration of the entire network being tested. And this or these techniques are basically designed to specifically used for different types of services present in a target system. So all the different services, they are being mapped by using your network mapping and also your OS fingerprinting technique. Next one is spoofing, right? So what is spoofing? Well, in simple terms, it is an act of using one machine to pretend to be another. So it's like, I'm this machine, but that's not that machine, just pretending, right? So spoofing techniques are used in both your internal and as well as your external penetration testing to access your computers and also to other hardware which is part of your system that are configured to basically reply only to a specific computers. So spoofing is like you mimic another computer. So that's spoofing. Pretty interesting technique. So another important penetration testing technique is your network sniffing. So sniffing techniques are used to capture data as they travel across the network, right? So this is data. This is like on your network, on the wire. So sniff data packets may help a tester analyze traffic connections and also data flows across the network, and whenever the data flows across the network. So you can go in and spoof it, or sniff it, sorry. So network sniffing is usually performed as part of your internal penetration testing, as it is very easy to capture data packets from within a network. So it is basically part of your internal penetration testing, all right? So next is your Trojan attacks. You've heard a lot about Trojan horse, Trojan virus, so let's talk about Trojan attacks. First, you need to understand what are Trojans. So basically, Trojans are malicious code or programs that are usually sent to a network as an email attachment or transferred by a chat room. Somehow they make their way inside a particular network, right? And a penetration test basically, or a penetration tester would basically do attempts to send specifically crafted Trojans to a network. And the next is the brute force attack, is most commonly known as your password cracking method, right? Brute force attack. Remember that. So brute force attack is your password cracking method. And the attackers basically try to use all potential characters combined in different series and forms to crack the password efficiently. So it can, it can overload a system and possibly stop it also from responding to legal requests. So that's called your brute force attack. So now you know Trojan attacks, brute force attacks. Let's move forward. So vulnerability scanning is next, and basically it's a comprehensive examination of your targeted areas in an organization. It could be your organization's network infrastructure as right? So that is your vulnerability scanning. So basically it is performed with automation tools. So the penetration testers usually use different tools to do vulnerability scanning, and they basically say that, okay, let me find where are the weaknesses in a particular organization's network infrastructure, right? So these automation tools, the first when they start working, they test a large number of weaknesses present in the system against a known vulnerability database or security holes, right? It provides your hand-on tools to network administrators, and that can be used to identify vulnerabilities because because usually the attackers, they exploit them. They know that, oh, we have a vulnerability database. Now let's look at the different security holes which could be potentially still there, and because they have not patched it or they forgot to patch their systems. So that's also one reason. Last is you should also know about the scenario analysis. So the final phase of testing makes risk assessment and vulnerabilities much more accurate. So that is also pretty critical. Okay, so moving on. So let me teach you a little bit about different elements of penetration testing process. So before performing a penetration test, it is very, very important, or I would say it's necessary to define the range of testing, right? So for different types of penetration testing, different types of network devices which exist. So you need to have, what is the range of my testing? Where does it start? Where does it stop? So the testing criteria are basically your target to the entire network and system, or it can simply target your device, such as your web servers, routers, firewalls, DNS servers, mail, etc. So you have to define that beforehand. So that is very critical to know. So let me look at some of the elements which will help you determine to properly define a range for a test, right? First is the extent of the test. You should know the target of the test. You should know the geographical location of the test. One thing else which you should also be familiar with is the person who is going to conduct the test. So next part of the penetration testing process is around performing the actual penetration test. So each company basically ensures that the processes that are implementing or they want to implement for a penetration test are appropriate. So these involve few things. One is you are gathering all the information which will significantly provide you all the security vulnerabilities, right? Next is it is basically responsibility of the tester to make sure that the applications, the networks, and all the systems are not vulnerable to a security risk, and this could allow unauthorized access moving forward. So now comes the important part, that is the reporting and delivering of results, which is the last part. So once a penetration testing is completed, the security team or the security testers examine all the information derived from the testing procedures. So the delivery report contains some of the elements which are your list of priorities and or prioritized vulnerabilities, also your risks, your information, penetration testing against strong points, weak points, also against the existing security systems, your risks against high or a medium or a low information about each device or the devices or the vulnerabilities which are associated with it. So these are some of the things which you should know, right? So testers usually make recommendations when they give the report. They make recommendations for repairing the found vulnerabilities or the list of vulnerabilities, and also they provide you with with technical information on how to fix those vulnerabilities. And as a penetration tester, you should provide these. And also these vulnerabilities could be the vulnerabilities found in the system or in your devices. They could also provide some useful resources to the organization, such as internet links that may help them to find additional information about, say, some kind of patches, also give links to some downloads and some repair steps where for the vulnerabilities they have found. So that is also recommended. So next is the scope of penetration testing. So we have two kinds of tests, which are non-destructive tests and destructive tests, right? The names are pretty obvious. So non-destructive tests mainly consists of your scanning and basically scanning, or you can say identifying remote systems for potential vulnerabilities. So once vulnerabilities are detected, then is the time to investigate, also to verify the findings, and mapping the vulnerabilities to a proper exploits, and also exploits which are affecting your remote system. So all these need to have proper care, to avoid disruption of service, which is very important. So you've found your vulnerabilities, you've found exploits, you have to take proper care so that your system disruption doesn't happen, right? All right, so you can say that with proper care to avoid the disruption, it does not attempt like a denial of service attack, right? So why should we not perform the DOS attack? So DOS, or the denial of service attack, is all about stopping, or you can say jamming, the application to stop all the services, because it is the main purpose of a denial of service attack. So in non-destructive, we are only going to access and not perform any interruptions or network, we don't want to jam the network. So that is what a non-destructive method is, and we are not going to provoke or not going to launch as a penetration tester a denial of service attack. On the other hand, the destructive testing, we can launch a DOS attack and also buffer overflow attack when you're about to test a system. So let's go over some of the key scopes for destructive test. First and foremost thing that you need to do is to test, when you're performing a test, is to test and scan, and also identify the remote system for potential vulnerabilities. Then you need to investigate and verify the findings. Basically, you have to map the vulnerabilities with proper exploits. Also, you got to attempt the denial of service, or you can say your DOS attack and a buffer overflow attack. All these can be part of your destructive testing. So now you know the key differences between both these tests. This brings us to end of class 1, and I've gone over all the 3 parts. In class 1, let me just recapture what we did. In part 1, you learned about what is penetration testing. What is a penetration test? I explained briefly to you penetration testing and its definition. I also covered why we need penetration testing, and in part 2 we also went over the details around the need for pen testing, and with the threat and impact model, which I went over first. Then I also explained to you why you should do, or what you should do when performing penetration testing. Also, we went over the different qualities that make a good pen tester, and we also went into a little depth and detail down there. In part 3, in this part, we talked mostly about the popular penetration testing techniques. I kind of explained to you briefly about them. And finally, in the end of this class, we went over the pen testing processes and details around that. So I'll see you in class 2, and thanks for joining.